Hey Sopranos fans, welcome to another episode here on Sopranos Street, soon to be renamed Bully Whispers, same channel, just a different name, and we are here today to compare Dickie Moltisanti and his son Christopher. Both of them seem to have a way with the ladies, as Dickie's charm has even Livia flirting with him, while Christopher does quite well for himself in landing Adriana Lacerva. And though some have their criticisms of Chris...
Did you ever notice he's the only motherfucker who can smoke a cigarette in the rain with his hands tied behind his back?
Adriana never had a problem with Chris's nose. To her, it was beautiful, Rubenesque. But that being said, there's much more to compare than just their je ne sais quoi with the ladies. In this episode, we will compare the two by first taking a second to address the parallels and reverse parallels between them, before digging into their real similarities and differences, as revealed through their actions and especially their desires. In quickly sorting through the parallels, we first notice that Dickie killed his father, who was sitting in the driver's seat of a car, while Christopher was killed by a father figure in the driver's seat. In addition, they both fathered children with women who weren't the loves of their lives, so to speak, and they were both responsible for the deaths of those women after finding out about a betrayal, with Dickie doing himself after learning it of Jessepina's affair, and Christopher having it done after learning of Aid becoming a snitch. Lastly, there's the issue of the crow. During the series, the crow in the window stirred up a lot of debate regarding its symbolism, both from viewers and even within the show itself.
The bird thing is if it's in the house, flapping around. And that's death, not bad luck.
In the movie, after Dickie kills his father and Tony shows up, we see a bird, can't really tell if it's a crow or not, fly out. As far as its symbolism, I'm not going to get into that in this episode. Since the series, I've heard everything from it represents a curse, to attempts to link it to the Edgar Allan Poe poem, even though that was called The Raven and not the Crow. Either way, it's after Dickie kills his father and begins visiting his Uncle Sally in prison that the comparisons can really come into focus, starting with the constipated owl look that Tony made fun of Chris for, but they don't stop there. Neither are particularly adept at creating plausible deniability to hide their actions. With Christopher, this is abundantly clear throughout the show.
You promised me you wouldn't do that shit anymore.
I didn't.
But with Dickie, it's most obvious when he tells his Uncle Sal about his father's death. His uncle didn't buy his story for 1 second.
My brother's hands were soft, like a baby's picadillo. Always with the manicures, your father.
Yeah, what's your point?
He never touched a hammer or a board in his life.
And it's likely that had his uncle pushed the issue a little harder, like Christopher, Dickie probably would have come up with a lame excuse as to why his father was on fire.
Must have crawled under there for warmth.
The last fact Uncle Sally brings into play regarding Dickie's turmoil also applies to Christopher.
Pain comes from always wanting things.
A son is not a thing.
It's the wanting.
While pretty much everyone in The Sopranos is driven by desire, even the particularly self-indulgent ones like Tony show some deference to practicality on occasion. The Moltisantis, on the other hand, especially Christopher, seem overwhelmingly moved by their desires, and it's in what they each desire that the differences between the two really become clear. With Christopher, we see a lot more of his life, so we know a lot more about his wants. While we'll get into all of his particular desires in the Chris Moltisanti evaluation episode, for the purposes of this discussion, the relevant desire is Chris's desire for an identity.
I got no identity. Even Brendan Fallone's got an identity. He's dead.
And what he wanted that identity to be.
There was a time in my life when being with the Tony Soprano crew was all I ever dreamed of.
His desire to secure this identity can be seen from the very beginning of the series, when he kills Emil without permission, thinking it would bring him recognition. It's further reinforced during Tony's trip to Maine with Meadow to visit a college, where Tony spots a known snitch.
Clipping a famous rat would put me a cunt hair away from being made.
But Tony opts to handle it himself. Ultimately, after getting shot, almost dying, supposedly seeing his father in hell and losing an organ, he's told by Tony that he will be inducted into the mob.
I'm proposing you to get your butt.
I fucking deserve it. Got no spleen, Gene.
Christopher gets his wish shortly thereafter at his making ceremony. The crow freaks him out, then flies off, and things begin going downhill in all aspects of his life. Eventually, he chooses his desire to be part of the mob over Adriana, leading to her death, and he was himself killed by Tony following a wreck shortly thereafter. When it comes to Dickie, his two main desires in terms of this comparison relate to either Jessepina or Tony. As opposed to Christopher, who chose Tony over Aid, Dickie killed his own father and took Jessepina, although it ended up the same for both of them. Betrayal, followed by a murder, followed by a complete breakdown. In the case of Jessipina, this really shouldn't have been much of a surprise. Even while her husband was alive and in the house, she was trying to seduce her stepson. In that light, is it terribly unbelievable to think that she would step out on Dickie? So, despite how sympathetic of a character she may be, and despite how deplorable of a person Hollywood Dick may have been, there may be an element of truth in what he said.
Oh, I marry sluts. What do I know?
Either way, it ended with Dickie being completely broken up over having killed his father for a woman that cheated on him, but it's during his visits with Uncle Sal after that we see his other desire.
But what do you want, Richard?
I'll be honest with you. I want to do a good deed.
In this comparison, his desire to do good is relevant primarily in regards to Tony, and therefore indirectly Christopher. His desire to help Tony is apparent by the fact that he had gotten the medicine that Tony wanted for Livia. This isn't the sort of thing Dickie would have done because Tony was his boss's kid. On the contrary, this likely would have pissed Johnny Boy off, so Dickie's only real motivation would have been a genuine affection for Tony. Ironically, this left Dickie with the undeserved reputation for being a junkie, while his son, who was very concerned with identity, actually was a junkie, and may have felt vindicated in regards to his own addiction due to the incorrect belief that his father was one also.
Between the coke, the vodka, whatever the fuck else he was squirting up his arm, let's be honest about the great Dickie Moltisanti, my dad, your hero. Wasn't much more than a fucking junkie.
As far as the last bit of advice that Sal gave Dickie in regards to how to do good by Tony,
I'm listening.
Stay out of his life.
we don't really know if Dickie was going to take that advice or not. He displayed guilt at letting Tony get this close, but after a bit of praise from Sil regarding Tony's potential, in and out of the Mafia, that's important to note, Dickie agrees to meet with Tony the next morning. Whether he was going to welcome Tony in or tell him no remains a mystery, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, but in the context of this discussion, it's irrelevant. Even if he was going to shut Tony out of the life, that message never made it, and in his death, he led Tony, and by extension his son Christopher, down the Mafia path. So in that sense, he got his wish.
My Christopher grew up to be like Tony. I'd be goddamn proud of him.
And through that chain of events, Christopher ended up being a gangster like Dickie. But how did they compare to each other? In terms of being a gangster, Dickie was superior in almost every way. Christopher's drug problem aside, Dickie was generally more composed, but when he exploded he was far more dangerous because he had the courage to do what Christopher didn't, like kill his father and the love of his life. Christopher balked at his chance to kill Tony and had to get his buddies to take care of Adriana. In this sense, from a mob perspective, they were complete opposites. Dickie was a great gangster who was killed too quickly and for a stupid reason, while Christopher was a liability as a gangster who should have been killed many times throughout the years and was finally killed for arguably legitimate reasons. This dynamic is also seen in their respective desires. Dickie wants to do some good because he knows he's a gangster that does bad things, but would like to improve a bit. Christopher, on the other hand, doesn't feel he has a real identity as a gangster or otherwise, and this is shown in their respective speeches from hell. While Dickie only talked about how bad it was, as if he knew he deserved it, Christopher tries to argue from beyond the grave that he only dabbled in the criminal lifestyle despite being a made man, and that he was basically an altar boy. Ultimately, Christopher is a watered-down version of Dickie, similar to how AJ is to Tony, but not to that extent. The differences between the two of them also parallel the difference in generations when it comes to the mob that Tony and others complain about. He lacks the commitment and dedication that previous generations had, while his mind wanders off to interests outside the mob. Of course, that may just be because, unlike the older generations, he has more paths available to him. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Soprano Street, soon to be Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.